side do you want to be on? Yep. Jim, these are ready to go. I was called in.
And my first Sunday of Advent is where I made my Advent. So.
Good morning, welcome. We have a guest that needs no introduction today, but he's a dear, dear friend of all of ours. So please take a seat as soon as you can. We'll get started. And I just want to also greet Sharon Lemler, who's here as well. Is she in the room yet? Sharon is with us, so keep your eyes out for her. She has
she's probably in the garden.
A beautiful, colorful scarf on. And we're thrilled to have both Jim and Sharon with us. So Jim and I have known each other for about a quarter of a century. And Jim has come and led vestry retreats at my previous parish and preached there. As you know, he's gone all across the country. He's in great demand to lead vestry retreats, diocesan retreats, clergy events, etc. So, Jim, welcome home. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's good to see family again in that respect, and you all are. Thank you.
So, Jim, I just want to begin by asking you a little bit about your coming to Christ Church. When you came, Christ Church had been going through a turbulent time. You came in kind of an unusual way. What led you to accept the call?
The unusual way was an airdrop, as I recall. Let me say a word about what this is. Believe it or not,
hold it this way.
This is my 48th anniversary coming up as a priest in God's church, because I was ordained when I was 12. And but we were ordained very young in those days there. So you have to do a lot of stuff over 48 years. So I worked in congregations, a beloved congregation in Indianapolis, was a seminary dean for a while, worked with dear Frank Griswold, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, in the director of mission, and actually thought that I'd probably never get to serve a congregation again, which is my first love. You know, it's great to be a seminary dean on some days. It's great to, do something executive and try to shape the church, the denomination. But my first love has always been this. And so when Tim, was it you that gave me the first call, as a matter of fact? Yeah, so he's responsible. I just want to say that right now. Don't get on my case, get on his, yeah. And that's right. And so I had read... I'd known Christ Church for a long time. I was the first president of this organization we called the Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes. And dear Jim Thomas, how many of you remember dear Jim Thomas, who was a lovely man in this parish, was the treasurer, and one of the founding parishes was Christ Church. So I knew it. Knew people, loved some people in this congregation, and then one day picked up the New York Times and saw that there was a lot of stuff happening at Christ Church at that point, you know, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? So when I got the call, Merrick, to say, would you be interested in considering this, my first prayer was, oh boy, you know, what an opportunity. Really, for a grand congregation, great people, the people I knew were all great, and to do it in a time where there was the need for some healing as a part of that. So I was dropped in on the first Sunday of Advent, 2007, and then went to a vestry meeting. That was, you know, the first Sunday of December, and then went to the December vestry meeting, which went on for hours and hours and hours, as we were also doing the vestry.
Nothing's changed, Jim. Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Okay, good.
We've got them down to a very manageable amount of time. So.
Okay, good. And we were having the spouses were all having drinks out, to put it bluntly, for hours and hours and hours while we were meeting. And there were only two agenda items. The first was, and I'll call it by the technical conflict name, the stuff that was going on. We spent 3 hours with the lawyer. Some of you were on the vestry at that point. And so, you know, and I thought, these people have tenacity, they have perseverance, they have resilience. And then, you know what the only other agenda item was? The nominations for the vestry. And I thought, my God, after this, people are willing to run to serve on this? This is really a sign of grace from God. So that's how I arrived on the scene and preached my little heart out, because it was Advent, you know, and there were all kinds of extra services and things. But to be a parish priest again was really coming home. And for Sharon, too. Has Sharon shown up yet? Yeah, there you are, darling. You were out in the garden, right? Yeah. That too, we just loved life in the parishes that we lived in, and also the period when my office was in New York and we were still living in Evanston and doing all that kind of back and forth. But this was, and you, and I look at the faces in this room, and you were just so welcoming and caring, and also willing to do the work to heal in many, many ways, and to remember good things that had happened, and to heal things that were challenging. So
Jim, you share with me that you're a 7 on the Enneagram, which means you're an internal optimist. What was it like when you parachuted in? What was the, you know, kind of the tenor of the congregation on a Sunday morning? You had a lot of work to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of help. You know, I won't have you all stand up because you would be embarrassed, but the wardens I got to work with during those years, looking around here, always had my back, and were always great friends as well as great leaders. And so that was just essential in that way. I was an optimist from when I first arrived. You know, Bobby Eggers asked some of us, as you're putting this wonderful book together, about the 275th, also asked if we would, some of us who have been here, to provide sermons we had preached. So I found, believe it or not, the sermon I preached on the first Christmas Eve, and it was all about coming home and what that meant. And Jesus having trouble finding a home to be born in, and us having a sense of great home here. And the parish motto at that point was a home for you, or something like that. You remember that, those of you who were around? So it was really kind of leaning and living into that. And again, I loved the energy of being a parish priest.
That's beautiful. Now this is an unfair question, but I got to ask it.
Good.
You have so many memories of your time at Christ Church, but what are some of the most vivid ones, like a Rorschach test? When you know, when you just think, what what comes to your mind when you think of Christ Church and the years that Sharon and you spent here?
Sharon, you want to take over? That could. And because, you know, there were memories of great joy of coming together, of much of the work that you're doing now, which is to have people feel at home, to welcome a greater diversity age-wise and likewise in the congregation. But a couple of things. We're sitting in this room, and one of the things that I thought of while walking into this room was there was this wonderful Church World Service project around AIDS in Africa. And they had built an African village for that in Grand Central Station. And then they wanted to have it somewhere in New England, they said, as if this were New England. But this is, sorry, I've really offended some Yankees now. But this was the biggest parish space between New York City and Boston. So, you know, relish that. So I will always remember when that village came and was built here. And it achieved, and this is even including Texas of all places, it achieved the third largest outpouring of money to support this AIDS ministry in its history in the United States. And you did that. And I remember, you know, what it was here, and I remember we did the first of a Lenten reflection book on compassion and what it meant. So the other thing, then, you can't go into all of those, but the times of compassion here were the other great memories for me. A lot of those were pastoral. A lot of those were about generosity. A lot of those were, you know, you're getting ready to use the loft again. That's what we called it 30 years ago or whenever it was that we did the loft. You remember that? And we were up there and Ian did that and that sort of thing. And then we did a Eucharist for a while that was for AA. And so we were up there, and a generous donor had allowed us to take down that ugly ceiling that had been, you remember that? And now it's a beautiful room, that sort of thing. And we said we wanted to fix the outside. And a guy whom I'd never met before came up to me and said, I want to be a part of that because, you know, this room saved my life. Those are memories.
Beautiful story. And if he's here today, he can help with our new service. Yeah. So Emily Ragsdale asked a question, and we've kind of touched a little bit about it. She had a fall this week, and so she couldn't be with us today, but I hope she's watching live stream. She said, you know, Christ Church was in a diminished state when you arrived, and you hadn't done parish ministry in about 20 years? Or,
yeah, about 15 years.
15 years. Mm-hmm. She said, were you happy that you answered the call as we were to have you heal us? So we've touched on that a little bit, but I want to ask you a variation of that. How do you go about healing a community? You've had a lot of gifts with healing individuals. And how does one do that when a community is going through a difficulty, whether it be a hospital, a school, a country, you know, or in this case, a church? How does one heal a community?
Well, the first part is, I think it was the great theologian Woody Allen, who said that 95% of life is showing up, and 95% of ministry is showing up, and being willing to lean in again to what needs to be done. The other part of that, honestly, was transparency and being willing to talk about things. And so, again, this, you know, I hadn't even thought of the importance of this room until walking in here now. But some of you will remember the conversations that we had about the goodness of, and the glory and the tradition, and you know, to experience it again today, of music in the life of this congregation and what it meant for kids and adults. And, you know, that was part of the story. And so was the honesty that was not about any single individual, but honesty about that the parish people had kind of, as just a lot of stuff was happening, had kind of distanced themselves from each other and weren't talking together as much. And so showing up and being willing to talk about life were probably the two things. And then the other thing is, although You know, I think it was Susan Marks who said, you know, the thing about you, Jim, is you will show up for the opening of an envelope. You know, because I'm such an extrovert that I just love this, you know. And that's important, as you know, in the work that you're doing here now. And I know very well in the work that you were doing before in White Marsh, too.
Right, right. So a question that kind of leads off of that is, you're always surprised when you show up some places. You kind of think you know what it's about. When I arrived at my last church, I didn't realize that the rector was supposed to face with his back to the congregation and celebrating the Eucharist, that you could physically get behind the altar, but there was a big heating unit behind it, so you couldn't get there in the center.
So you had a spirit of warmth in important places while you were celebrating
and in the
Holy
summer,
Mass.
The church was not air conditioned. In the summer, it was like an inferno, and there were fans, attic fans that would blow whatever air on the congregation, but the clergy up front in all these vestments were roasting and just covered with sweat. So that was a surprise, and the fact that no one in that congregation had invited the rector over for a social event for about a decade because he had refused social engagements. So my wife and I felt like lepers. We were not invited out, and so I want to ask you, what kind of surprises did you find when you came to Christ Church and to Greenwich that you didn't, you know, that just opened your eyes?
That's a good question. I mean, again, I was mostly, as C.S. Lewis wrote a book entitled Surprised by Joy. That was the biggest surprise for me, was that the joy was just intense. And I remember those first, that whole Advent and first Christmas that I was here, to be back in a parish, to hear that kind of music, and you people were so inviting, and at that point you were doing these little suppers at people's houses and all of that. You know, I was so surprised by the joy of it all. And it brought tears to my eyes so often. I had to just kind of make sure that I, you know, was all together before going up in the pulpit or doing whatever I was doing and that sort of thing. And, you know, I knew Greenwich over the years. And the parish that I had served the longest for almost 20 years in Indianapolis was a parish of, and I will use this to describe you, was a parish of great elegance. But I found, and was actually somewhat taken aback by it, that the elegance was on steroids in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Now, don't let that swell your heads out there too much, but I think that rings true. But I will say I was surprised. I thought I was in New England, so you've just disabused me of this, but right. I love New England, and so I'm a happy camper here. Yes. You dedicated about 10 years of your life to leading the congregation, and one never can take credit for what goes on. It's always the handwork of God, and also it takes so many people. The laity here are phenomenal.
Yes.
Their hard work, their brilliance, their teamwork. But during that decade of time, what are some of the accomplishments that stand out in your mind that we were able to do this together?
Well, I think the greatest single accomplishment was the sense of forbearance that turned into love and the healing that happened here. We knew that the buildings, that there had been neglect, and that they were in some dilapidated condition, and a couple of them were downright dumps, actually. And so something had to be done about that. And the people rose to that occasion in generosity, in planning things. I remember taking off to take communion you remember the Ogdens, and I was taking communion to Peter Ogden, who is one of America's great architects, which wasn't so much known at that point. And I took along the plans for all the work we were going to do outside and all the tuck pointing and all that sort of thing. And he looked at them, and in fact, I did it twice, but I won't tell the other story. But one time, when we finally got it down to what we were doing, and he looked at them, and then turned to me and said, "It's about time." So it was about time. It was God's time for us to do things. And I remember doing that in so many ways here, in things that were contentious too. You know, I will always be sorry that building what is now a built and beautiful building for Neighbor to Neighbor was a question of contention in the community and a little bit in the parish as well. That was tough.
So let's talk about that. During your time, and I'd say a lot of this comes through your spirit, you have a great gift for eliciting generosity, and there is generous support for many projects, including several facility renovations and the preparing the way for Neighbor to Neighbor, which you were solidly behind. What did these mean for you? And how did you elicit that generosity from folks, which is, it's an art, it's a gift?
Well, thank you. I mean, the spirit of you all, this is a generous community, and you people are generous. That's one reason, in the whole flow of Greenwich, Connecticut, that's one reason you pray and come to church, is because you are, in your hearts, generous people. And that had always been, you know, after we did the capital campaign and the interior and exterior work and all that sort of thing, and I wanted to do just a retreat, but I didn't want to do anything theologically. And I'm such an extrovert, there's nothing that can scare me more than the words silent retreat. So I thought I won't do that. But a friend of mine, the first faculty member that I hired when I was the dean of the seminary in Chicago, was now, and he was a Presbyterian, which I had to push on that, but he was now the president of the Presbyterian seminary in Chicago, McCormick Seminary. And he was hosting, and a dear friend of mine whom I get to have breakfast with now twice a month, and the only group where I'm the youngest person is the retired old clergy of the big steeple, you know, the sort of big churches in Indianapolis. And they were doing this thing on, there's this wonderful institute, go online and learn about it, called the Lake Institute on Religious Giving. And it's part of the, and pardon me while I cross myself here, because we always do in Indianapolis when this word is used, the Lilly School of Philanthropy. In fact, in Indianapolis, Merrick, I don't know if you knew this, but you'll think of it the next time you sing this hymn. We thought in Indianapolis that the hymn that we all sing, The Church's One Foundation, was actually about the Lilly Endowment, and that it was nice of people to sing it all over the country.
Some of us think of that as the church pension fund.
Well, and that's true of the church's pension fund, too. So I went and did that for a couple of weeks and immersed myself into the spiritual reflection on what generosity means, because their basic tenet as learning about religious giving is that it's not about guilt, it's not about some transaction, it's only about grace. Oh, there it is again. I guess that's my theme today. Grace and generosity flows from that. And so to see that in so many ways here, and sometimes I think I push that too much. The other time that, you know, I will have to apologize for those of you that had knee problems after we had, for the period of time, Trinity Church, and this was, you were the warden, and us, you know, worshiping together, first in the summer and then all year and that sort of thing there. And it was great and it was wonderful, but it was too big a weight on the system. So I think it's generosity that we learn about, and sometimes, for me, this is just me, I push that a little too hard.
So this is a short question, but just a question for candor. You know, every congregation has a different DNA. Mm-hmm. And if you were back in Indianapolis or off doing a teaching in Chicago or New York, and someone said, what was Christ Church like? What would you say the DNA of our congregation is?
Well, I'd have to use that word again, generosity. It's a generous, inquiring, celebrating congregation. Isn't that what you all want to do? Isn't that why gathering, why music, why all kinds of things have been so important for so long? Because it begets generosity, and one of my tenets like the Nicene Creed is generosity begets more generosity. But you love celebrating. You love doing things with each other. You love, some great parties. And that was true of my parish in Indianapolis as well. And as a 7, can I tell a quick story? That's always a danger with me, I know. As a 7, and I'm told this is now in a book about the Enneagram. You remember the Enneagram, and you have different personality types and that sort of thing. It's in this book that a consultant to us wrote about a burial that was going to happen when we were doing a staff retreat here. And and I'm not going to name names here, and the funeral had already happened, but we were going to go down to Valhalla. You ever been to the cemetery in Valhalla? And we were ready to go, and the funeral home didn't send enough limousines. So we were going to have to wait for the limousines, but then Valhalla is such a popular cemetery that if you get there too late, if you get there for noon, it's closed from noon to 1, and you can't go in even until after 1. So this was a moment of crisis. And the widow, I wish I could just say her name, but I won't. The widow said, "What are we going to do, Jim?" And I said, "Well, why don't you serve the quiche and martinis that you were going to serve after the burial, and I'll sit down and play some cocktail piano." And so we did that for for an hour or so. We got in the limousines, went, did the obsequies. So this woman included it in the book because she said that's what a 7 parish priest would do. And that celebration and the way that this congregation loves to party in all kinds of ways is a part of the DNA here.
So I'm taking notes, by the way.
Yeah,
this is really helpful. And
yeah, right.
You know the old joke about martinis, right? 1 martini, 2 martini, 3 martini, floor martini.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you want to cut off early on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to our thread here. You do get to parachute down in a lot of different places. You've seen so many churches across the years. What do you find consistent behind growing, thriving congregations?
Well, they do their work, for one thing. They do their strategy. They do. I was here a month ago, not in Greenwich, but although I did stop through or something, I can't remember, but I was doing a thing in New York City, which is actually a Lilly Endowment funded program where clergy from both the Diocese of Atlanta and the Diocese of Michigan, although I shouldn't say diocese because of the 40 people in these 2 cohorts, probably 2/3 of them were not Episcopalians. But they were doing work on leadership and adaptive leadership, a leadership that has a deep work to it. And I realized that, that's where it begins. It begins with work and inspiration, generosity, and willing to take some risks. And having seen and helped some congregations all over the place, that's what I saw here, and that's what I see over and over.
So you've dedicated a lot of your life to congregational development and leadership. Why those 2 things? And when you look at leadership, what makes for a fine leader? What do we need in leaders in all sorts of arenas?
Well, first of all, thanks for saying all sorts of arenas, because leadership is something in church life that belongs to clergy, yes, but it's really about everyone who is taking on that important work of leadership. And what happens in church about leadership is supposed to then infuse the leadership of the society around us. So it's really important stuff. And I've never known a congregation that grew without good leadership. One of the things, getting back to what we sometimes call Mr. Lilly and the Lilly Endowment, Uncle Eli, he wrote a book about the beloved cathedral in Indianapolis, which was where I started out in Indianapolis. And he called leadership in this book the pearl of great price. And, from the gospel parable about that. And I think that's the other part. The reason I love learning about leadership is because you really see what people hold so dear, what is precious for them, and then they try to make that actualize in the institutions that they're serving. So that's what leaders have been doing here. That's what you do in the community. That's things that you do in a business like founding a newspaper. That's a very bold thing to do. And how old is that newspaper now?
Almost 9 years.
Almost 9 years. You know, all of that. So I have been endlessly fascinated with leadership, and also believe that one of the purposes of philanthropy is to assist with the forming of leaders. So the foundation that I serve, you know, we do all this stuff for these arts organizations, but I'm constantly learning and mentoring and trying to help leaders of arts organizations in our city, as well as the provision of funds, which is the purpose of the foundation.
So you're here as part of our 275th anniversary, and I hope you'll come back to help celebrate your 50th
Thank you.
ordination anniversary.
That's
That'll be
very
very
kind
special
of
for
you.
us to have you back for.
Okay.
But we're not only going to just look backwards and celebrate our history, but we want to pivot it, especially come fall, and start to look out in the future and think about what do we need to do now here in our own time to ensure that Christ Church will be here 275 years from now. What do you see as some of the supreme challenges before churches today over the next, say, 10 to 20 years?
Well, you know, part of this has to do with the cultural transitions that are going on, what I like to call shift. And I've been using that term too long, so that when I was a seminary dean, one senior class out of the senior seminar that I did gave me a T-shirt that read "Shift Happens," and I had to be very careful wearing it and how I pronounce it. But that's what's happening, shift, and the other thing too, in many ways. So yes, the Episcopal Church numbers are declining, but so is every form of religiosity in America right now. So we have to both reclaim the gospel in ways that are interpreted differently than we probably did before. And a wonderful guy named Mark Grayson, who is a very active parishioner in a parish up the shore here, and I have written a paper recently on, and we're doing at the Endowed Parish thing, I know it's called something else now, the EPN, the Episcopal Parish Network, a workshop called Why Church, because we think the critical thing is doing what you're doing, like seeing the 9 o'clock this morning happening with the Messy Church. It's finding parallel ways of welcoming and being church that are different from the norm, so that we can reach out to what are called the nones, N-O-N-E-S, you know, those who now, the vast number of younger people say, even if they have a spiritual sense, that they're not part of any religious tradition per se. And also those who, again, this is terminology from the sociologists, who are spiritual but not religious. So we've really got to find a way of engaging that, having traditional and new forms of welcoming and honoring the spiritual request. By the way, the Lake Institute on Religious Giving and the IU School of Philanthropy do all this study, and they found out that the number of donors in America, individual donors, in the last 10 years has gone down 30%. And it matches, and I did this work, it matches the mainline decline in church participation and attendance. So it's not just to have a church, it's how are people going to learn the laboratory of generosity. That's one of the things we contribute the most as people of faith, and at the synagogue next door too. So we've got to find a way of connecting and inviting with people where they have spiritual yearning, and that we can help that become service and generosity.
Right. So I think that people are inherently spiritual. Mm-hmm. And they have an inherent spiritual hunger, and that's just never going to go away. Just like we're not going to invent a pill so no one will ever have an appetite, you know, that in all likelihood, you know, there may be a pill, but people are always going to be hungry. They're going to need sleep, and there will be a spiritual component where they want to quest and seek and search for meaning and wonder, is there more to life than this? Is there a creator? So if a church focuses on that, and they want to be in relationship with others, and builds community, and talks about purpose and meaning and value and character, I think there's no reason churches should not continue to thrive. The Reverend Dr. Cheryl McFadden is away on a well-deserved vacation, wanted to ask, do you think churches are going to continue to decline as we've seen across the country? We have seen the most significant decline in the last few years is among evangelical churches, actually.
Yes, very much.
And that the mainline
Yep.
churches are starting to see an uptick. As you look out and you read a lot of stuff, what do you see likely to happen over the next decade in terms of church numbers and growth and attendance?
Well, let me just talk about the Episcopal Church for a moment, but that's true. You know, believe it or not, the two largest expressions of Christianity in America, which are evangelical churches and Roman Catholic churches, both are in decline. Less noticeably in the Roman Catholic Church because of the immigrant populations. But if you take the immigrant populations out, their decline is as severe as ours in terms of native-born U.S. Roman Catholics. So what do you do about that then, is one part of that question. And so we're all in this together. And I had an evil friend who had a cocktail party in Houston the first time that the research showed that the Baptists were declining. He thought that was a great occasion for a cocktail party as an Episcopalian. No, all kidding aside there, it means that there still will be, right now, we've got some crises. Last year there were 450 clergy that retired in the Episcopal Church, and there were only a couple of hundred people ordained. The small churches in Connecticut, many of them, and in Indiana too for that matter, are getting smaller. So it takes what I call contrarian churches, like Christ Church, like Trinity Church Indianapolis, where I served, who are doing this work that you're doing of parallel development, of new ways of inviting, in order to turn that. I remember who's in charge of the church is God, and God's not going to let the gospel fail. And hopefully we're prayerful enough and smart enough to learn that we can be participants with God in envisioning some new things.
I want to pivot for a moment and just, everyone would probably love to know what are you doing now in your life, and what is Sharon doing and your daughters? If you could give us kind of an update. I know you failed at retirement.
I did fail.
So just give us an update about your work in philanthropy and how Sharon's doing and the girls.
Okay, quickly, and again, Sharon could speak for herself, but Sharon went back and she retired from New York Presbyterian Hospital here in the psychiatric. It's not the one in the city, but the one out in White Plains. I was talking about you. Anytime you leave, I always talk about you, darling. And you can talk to her about what she's doing now. So we've got 5 grandkids. We get to spend a lot of time doing that. She helps with this amazing group in Indiana called Women for Change, which is to try to bring civic awareness and, you want to talk? Okay. So what do you like to do? This is about our retirement.
Oh, not our marriage or anything? I like to instruct Jim. I'm his consultant. I've taught him everything he knows. No, I'm just kidding. What was the question?
The question is just kind of an update on how you are doing and Jim's doing, your 3 girls and your grandchildren.
Oh, Lisa.
We knew her dad, her brother's dad, and mother very, very well.
In South Bend. We played chamber music with her dad in their living room, and he played the viol da gamba, and I played violin. And Michelle, the French professor, Michelle started with a P.
Who was the flutist?
The man.
From Notre Dame.
Oh, you were out at school by then. Okay. We are fine. I had a lot of rough hours and days in the last 2 years with a hip that broke, and then it was repaired with big spikes, and then that repair slowly went bad, and the bone was dying and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, finally in August, I got a brand new one that's all shiny and new. And so I'm walking, you know, if it's warmed up, I don't look like I still hurt, but if I get up out of an auditorium chair, I look awful till I get going. So I've joined the Bionic Joint Club. All those who are members, please raise your hand. And we have, as Jim said, Katie has had 3 little boys, ages 8, 5, and 2. Our middle daughter is looking at her older sister, says, I'm not getting married and having kids. No, not really. But she is not married, does not have children. And they both live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the University of Michigan is. It's about a 4-hour car trip for us, 4.5. And our third daughter was getting her doctoral degree during COVID and had to move around to get postdoc fellowship and stuff, and she was in Minneapolis, and then she was in Seattle, and now she found a tenure track job that was available, which is kind of rare. They're kind of rare. Anyway, she found one, and she said, I'll go anywhere but Texas if I can find one. And she got it in Kansas, so she's in Lawrence, Kansas, teaching at the university in Kansas. And she has 2 children who are 4 and 2. Her subject is, she's teaching in the School of Education, teachers who will work, who are not just special ed, but who will have children on the autism spectrum in their mainstream classes. How to do that, what the special kids need, and how to handle that with your other kids. And she's doing a lot of research, too. She brings in research money, which the university likes, of course. And I'm fine. Oh, Women for Change, that's what you were talking about. If you want to look at the website, Women for, with the digit, Change, Indiana, all one word, .org. After the 2020 election, was it, Jim? No, 2016. 2016. Remember when there was an International Women's March? And yeah, there was a lot of women finding power in numbers. And we've joined the march in Stamford here. But in Indianapolis, one of the things that happened was that a woman rabbi and another woman leader in the community wanted to just not have it end there for women's issues. And they got some kind of a church parish hall that could hold a couple hundred people, and sent the word out that they wanted to meet as women of the region. And 3,000 women showed up. So anyway, they started Women for Change, and it's a nonpartisan women's issues advocacy kind of stuff. So even in the benighted and backward legislatively state of Indiana, we have changed the definition of rape. We have got birth control authorized through certain programs and public aid and so on, and stuff like that. Housing, some housing issues, and maternal child health is not good in Indiana, so now it's better. So we fight for stuff like that.
So let me ask you a closing question, and then we'll see if any questions come from the audience briefly. But Jim, I think you either just turned 71 or yes. And I'm always interested in how people age well and keep active. Terry Ellsbury is a great hero of mine here on staff. He had to leave a few minutes ago, but he's 80 and going super strong. When people retire, sometimes the phone doesn't ring. They're not in demand. It's a huge loss. But the two of you keep so active and engaged and giving back. What would you say are some of the ways to thrive as you move into, later years?
Well, it is. It is to keep going. Can I talk about Alan's foundation for a moment? Because that's over your life you build up all of these relationships. So my day job, and it's a full-time job, is to be a president and CEO of the Alan Whitehill Clues Charitable Foundation. And it had to be his whole name because his family had a previous foundation that was just called the Clues Fund, and we have to keep them distinguished in some way. And this was a former parishioner and friend for the last 20 years of his life. And this family were the great arts philanthropists in the city of Indianapolis. They built the Symphony Hall, they had the major wing in their collection at the Art Museum, and they did all kinds of things. And Alan was a lovely guy and didn't have children or that sort of stuff. So he left his whole estate to become this Arts and Culture Foundation in Indianapolis. And those of us who were the first board of that were very cleverly his accountant, his lawyer, his administrative assistant, and his priest. But always I knew I was going to go back and have the responsibility for how this growing institution. So it has to do with your question, believe it or not, and that is to find that which warms your heart, which is the other part of leadership, actually. It's something that flows from the heart, and that something you really find precious. And so I love getting up every morning and doing this work. And it's everything from still the big arts institutions to these wonderful new African-American and Latinx community development organizations at the same time. Now, one thing that we're very involved with is the largest, believe it, in Indianapolis, for heaven's sake, the largest black African-American art festival in the country. It's been featured in the New York Times and reported on several times at this moment. And to be able to be a part of something like that, as well as still doing the churchy stuff. I was going to be utterly invisible, but I forgot that the new bishop who was elected the same year that we moved back, I had known since she was a curate. And so that didn't work so well. And so make sure when you retire that yes, you can shape your life, and what about seeing those grandchildren, huh? Yes. So it's unending inquiry and interest for me, Merrick.
Beautiful, beautiful. Did we miss any key questions that someone wants to make sure we ask before we adjourn? Well, then we hope you'll come back in 2 years to celebrate your 50th anniversary. Share more wisdom. Just share the love. We love being with you. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Sharon and Jim, for coming all the way from Indianapolis. God bless you.
Thank you very much.